The story of Jacob, also known as Israel. Dear friends, in today's story, we will go through the story of Abraham's grandson and the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob. Jacob's father was Isaac, the promised son of Abraham, and his mother was Rebekah. Isaac, who married Rebekah at the age of 40, did not have children for 20 years. Because his wife was barren, Isaac prayed to the Lord for her. The Lord heard his prayer. Then Rebekah conceived twins. The children struggled within her, so she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger. When the days of her pregnancy were over, she gave birth to twins. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Thus Jacob's story starts here. The boys grew up. Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. One day Jacob made some stew. At that time Esau came in from the field, exhausted. Esau, who was famished, asked Jacob for some stew. Even though they were twins, Jacob was upset at being younger by birth. So, using the opportunity he got, he asked for Esau's birthright in return for the stew. Esau valuelessly sold his birthright to Jacob for a single meal, and he confirmed it with an oath. Time passed by. When Esau was 40 years old, he took 2 women from the Hittites as wife, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. As years went by, Isaac's eyesight grew dim. Thinking he was about to die, Isaac called Esau in order to bless him. Isaac, who loved the game Esau hunted, told him to hunt some game and prepare delicious food as he likes, and bring it to him so he may eat it and then bless Esau. On hearing this, Esau went quickly to hunt. However, even Rebekah heard this conversation. Rebekah, who got the prophecy that the older will serve the younger, tried to fulfill that through her own efforts. She called Jacob, the son she loved, and explained her plan. Even though he was reluctant, his mother strengthened him. Then, according to her advice, he caught 2 goats from their flock and brought it to her. Rebekah prepared food for Isaac as he liked it from them. But just food is not enough, right? Esau and Jacob had different body types. Unlike Jacob, Esau had a hairy body. Jacob understood that even though Isaac could not see well, if he touched him, he would be caught. He feared that it would land him a curse and not a blessing. But his mother had a solution. She wrapped his hands and neck with the skins of the goat. Then she dressed Jacob in Esau's best garments which were in the house, and sent him to Isaac with the food she had prepared. For all his father's questions, he pretended he was Esau and answered them. Isaac, who suspected that this was Jacob's voice, felt him and thought he was Esau. So he ate the food and drank the wine he had brought. Then, smelling the smell of Esau's garments that Jacob had worn, he blessed him. Thus, what he did not have by birth, he got from his brother for some stew, and the firstborn's blessings from his father through deceit. As soon as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, when he had scarcely gone out from the presence of his father, Esau came in from hunting. He too made delicious food and came to his father, and asked him to eat and bless him. Isaac, who recognized Esau's voice, trembled. Isaac realized that Jacob had stolen his blessing. Esau too understood that Jacob had taken his birthright and blessing through deceit. Knowing that all his blessings were gone, Esau cried out bitterly in front of his father. Isaac, who had given all his blessings to Jacob, did not have anything to give Esau. Because of the blessing Isaac gave Jacob, Esau hated him. Esau, who thought that Isaac was about to die, planned to kill Jacob after his father's death. Rebekah, knowing Esau's intention, called Jacob and told him to live with her brother in Haran for a while. Besides, Isaac and Rebekah, who were displeased with Esau's Hittite wives, told Jacob to go to Rebekah's brother Laban and take one of his daughters as wife. Thus, with his father's blessings, Jacob set out for his uncle Laban's house in the land called Paddan Aram or Haran. Long back, when Abraham left Ur in Mesopotamia, on hearing God's call, he came to Haran and stayed there until his father's death. After his father's death, God called Abraham once again. We have mentioned this in our previous stories. When Abraham left Haran, his brother Nahor stayed there. Nahor's grandchildren were Rebekah and Laban. Thus Jacob left Beersheba and went to Haran. During the journey, because the sun had set, he decided to spend the night there. He took one of the stones there and put it under his head, and lay down to sleep. And he dreamed. And there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood above it. The Lord reaffirmed the covenant he made with Abraham. Through you and your offspring the nations of the earth shall be blessed. When Jacob woke up, he realized that God was in that place, and he was afraid. He got up early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar, and poured oil over it. Then he made a vow to the Lord, and he named that place Bethel. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he stood by a well that was there. He inquired about Laban to a few shepherds from Haran. At that time Laban's younger daughter Rachel came to that place with her flock of sheep. Having understood from the men of Haran that she was Laban's daughter, he revealed himself to her. When Rachel came to know of who he was, she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news, he ran to meet Jacob and welcomed his sister's son. Thus Jacob started living there. A month later, Laban called Jacob and told him to ask for whatever he wanted as wages for the work he had done for him. Jacob asked for Rachel as his wife. He said that he would work for Laban for 7 years for it. Laban agreed to that. The 7 years seemed to Jacob as only a few days because of the love he had for her. When the 7 years were over, Laban kept his word and prepared the wedding feast. Laban, however, sent his older daughter Leah to the room of Jacob, who had gotten drunk in the feast. It was only in the morning that he realized she was Leah. Jacob, who had tricked his father and brother to fulfill his wishes, was now tricked by his own uncle. Nevertheless, he asked Laban why he had tricked him. Laban said that it was not their custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. He asked Jacob to complete Leah's bridal week, and then he will give him Rachel too. Jacob obeyed that. Thus Rachel also became his wife. Laban gave both of them a maidservant each. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. Leah conceived and gave birth to a son. She thought that because she gave Jacob a son, he will love her, and so named the child Reuben. But Leah was not able to gain Jacob's love. She conceived again and gave birth to her second son Simeon, and then her third son Levi. Every time she thought that Jacob would love her, but that didn't happen. Then she conceived again for the 4th time and bore a son. This time she said, "I will praise the Lord," and named him Judah. Rachel, seeing that Leah had 4 children while she had none, gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob. She hoped that she would have children through her. Bilhah gave birth to 2 sons, first Dan, then Naphtali. Seeing this, Leah too gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob. She too had 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Then Leah again had 2 sons, Issachar and Zebulun. Afterward, Leah conceived for the 7th time and bore a daughter named Dinah. Then the Lord remembered Rachel and opened her womb. She bore a son to Jacob and named him Joseph. After Joseph's birth, Jacob decided to return to his own home. When Laban heard of his decision, he tried to change his mind, but later conceded. Laban decided to give Jacob his wages in the form of sheep and goats from his flocks. He put the rest under his sons and set a distance of 3 days' journey between them. However, Jacob's flock soon grew. On seeing this, Laban's sons grumbled against him, saying that he gained all his wealth from what was their father's. Laban too did not regard Jacob with favor as before. Then God appeared to Jacob and told him to go back to his own country. Thus Jacob took his wives, children, and wealth and set out to go back to his father Isaac after approximately 20 years. On the 3rd day, Laban came to know that Jacob left without telling him. Laban set out after them. But during the journey, God appeared to Laban and commanded him not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Thus Laban, who reached Jacob, parted without doing anything bad. When they had started their journey, Rachel had taken one of Laban's household gods. But neither did Jacob know of this, nor was Laban able to find it. Then Jacob set out and reached his brother's land, Edom. On hearing Jacob's arrival, Esau set out with 400 men to meet him. Because Jacob had tricked his brother earlier, when he heard of Esau's arrival, he was frightened. Thinking that he would still be angry, Jacob divided all that he had into 2 groups. He thought that if Esau attacks one group, the other can escape. Then Jacob prayed to the God of Abraham and Isaac. He prayed that God would save him from his brother. During this time, though God had appeared to him several times, Jacob was not able to call him my God and submit to him. Even while he prayed, he planned for how to escape from his brother in his own might. The same night he crossed over all that he had over the Jabbok River. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Jacob, understanding that he was not an ordinary man, did not leave him. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint. Yet Jacob said that unless the man blesses him, he would not leave him. The man asked him what his name was. He replied, Jacob. The man said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with man, and have prevailed. Then he blessed him and left. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been spared. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel. 20 years back, the sun which set in Bethel over Jacob, who started his own life's journey from Beersheba, rose once again on Jacob, who became Israel. Though he wrestled with God and won, Israel, who now limped, had a staff like a friend for the rest of his life. Understanding that he could not save himself through his own strength, Israel now put his trust completely in God. Then when he lifted his eyes, he saw Esau and his men coming toward him. Nothing like Jacob feared occurred. Esau ran and embraced him and kissed him. Jacob forcefully gave Esau what he had set apart for him. Then Esau went back to his own land. Jacob pitched his tent and eventually reached Shechem in Canaan. There God told Jacob to build an altar in Bethel to the God who appeared to him while he was fleeing Esau. Jacob obeyed that. Then they journeyed from Bethel. When they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel went into labor, and because it was hard labor, she died. Jacob named his son Benjamin. Then they set out from there and came to his father Isaac in Hebron. He lived there. Years passed, and Jacob's son Joseph was now 17 years old. He would go with his brothers to tend sheep, and he brought a bad report of them to his father. Because of this, his brothers hated him, but Jacob loved him more than any other of his sons, as he was the son of his old age. In this time, due to two of his dreams, his brothers hated him even more. Following this, one day Jacob sent him to check on his brothers who were grazing the flock. On seeing Joseph, his brothers decided to take revenge on him. When he came near, they stripped him of his robe and threw him into an empty cistern. Then they sold him to Ishmaelites who had come that way. They took him to Egypt. Joseph's brothers took his robe and slaughtered a goat, and dipped his robe in blood. They made Jacob believe that Joseph was killed by a wild animal. Jacob's further life was filled with pain about Joseph. The Ishmaelites who reached Egypt sold him to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph, who had worked faithfully there. Joseph ended up in jail. Joseph worked faithfully even there. Then he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and at the age of 30 became Prime Minister of Egypt. Another person who, like Jacob, grieved thinking that Joseph had died was his grandfather Isaac. Isaac, not knowing that Joseph was alive in Egypt, not being able to see him one more time, died at the age of 180 years. 1 year before Joseph became Prime Minister of Egypt. After Joseph became Prime Minister, Egypt had 7 years of abundance. Joseph stored the extra grain that was harvested at that time. The famine which followed affected not only Egypt, but also the surrounding regions. As Joseph had stored grain, people from the surrounding regions came to Joseph to buy grain. Among them were Joseph's 10 older brothers. Because Joseph, who was sold as a teenager, now looked and acted like an Egyptian, his brothers were not able to recognize him. Joseph, who recognized his brothers, revealed himself to them when they came to buy grain the second time. Though they were scared, Joseph comforted them and sent them on their way. He also sent chariots with them to bring to Egypt his father and all his household. When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive and the Prime Minister of Egypt, his spirit was revived. Then Jacob came to Egypt with all that he had, and saw Joseph. They lived in the land of Goshen, which Joseph had given them. When Jacob reached Egypt, he was 130 years old. When Israel's time to die grew near, he blessed Joseph's sons and his own sons. He also told Joseph when he dies he is to be buried with his fathers. After he blessed his sons and Joseph's sons Ephraim and Manasseh, whom he counted as his own, Israel leaned on his staff and worshipped God. Jacob, who became crippled after wrestling with God, whenever he looked at the staff which steadied him for the rest of his life, remembered Peniel, where his dependence turned from himself to his God. Even though his physical body was weakened, knowing that God was not ashamed to call himself the God of Jacob, his heart was glad. After blessing his sons and worshipping God, Jacob lifted his feet and laid them on the bed, and died, and was joined to his fathers. Jacob's life measured 147 years. Of these he spent 17 years in Egypt. Then, on Joseph's word, his servants, the physicians, embalmed him for 40 days. The Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Then, with Pharaoh's permission, Israel's sons took his body to Canaan, and they buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite. After burying Jacob, Joseph and his brothers returned to Egypt. It is the descendants of this Jacob that God chose as his own people, the people of Israel. Here we end the story of our forefather Jacob, who became Israel. God bless you.